This is Zestology, the podcast all about living with more energy. I'm Tony Wrighton, and since it's about energy, what better thing to look at today than the most Googled diet of 2017? And it's a diet that is not just about kind of slimming up and toning up, although you can get that as well, but it is especially about having bags full more energy, and that is ketosis. Ketosis is something you've probably heard creeping into Zestology a little bit more over the last few months because I've been doing it. And let me tell you, when I started out, it was a bit of a nightmare. As you'll hear on this podcast, first month was really tricky. It's hard to get into ketosis and you feel pretty knackered for a while afterwards. I'm just walking around the park in London. I hope it's not too windy and too blowy as I record this. To look at ketosis in a little bit more detail, I have enlisted the help of the world's foremost expert on ketosis. He's very modest and he probably wouldn't say that. In fact, he likes to kind of give credit to all his other researchers in the field. But Dom D'Agostino is a world expert. I think a lot more people heard about him and ketosis after he appeared on Tim Ferriss's podcast a couple of times. And now he's on here as well. If you are new to ketosis, this could be just the thing for you to kind of get into it, because he answers a lot of basic and very detailed questions about the ketosis diet. Also tells us how he lives, what his routine is, what he eats in the morning. It's quite a lot, actually. I was quite surprised. And I think for anyone who's interested in decreasing inflammation, sorting their digestion out, helping their skin, definitely firming up and toning up and living with more energy, ketosis might, not definitely, but might be the diet for you. And just before we go to Dom, I guess I probably should confess that because I had a tough time on ketosis for the first month and then I've really enjoyed it for the last 2 or 3 months, I feel like I'm becoming a bit of a ketosis bore. So I'm gonna have to rein that in a little bit. I'm just so enthusiastic about it. I want to tell other people about it, but I'm aware that it's not for everybody. It might, however, be for you. Let's speak to someone who's definitely not a ketosis bore, and that is Dom D'Agostino. Dom D'Agostino, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, well, thank you for coming on. We were just talking about how before this interview, I've kind of hoovered up all the podcast interviews that you've done on ketosis, because I think when you get into this stuff, there's such a thirst for knowledge from world-acknowledged experts. And I just lapped up all the interviews that you've done already. So I've got a long laundry list of questions to ask you.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. Yeah, I have given quite a few. I think over 100. I was counting them the other day and just trying to compile them. So it's great that there's a lot of interest in this area, especially as the science is emerging too. So there's a lot of new information coming out. So always new things to talk about.
The thing is, there's still not a great deal out there for people. And actually, in this country, it's even harder. I think it's even harder to be keto than in the States, because in the States, you've got all these delicious supplements and stuff like that. I'm coming to the States in the next couple of days, and I was Googling. Over there, you've got the keto cookies, and you've got the bites and all this kind of thing. We don't have all that stuff over here. I think we're about 5 years behind you, so it's not as easy for us.
Oh, that's right. I kind of forget that sometimes. I'm a little more linked in with the clinical application and Matthew's friends located there in the UK. Yeah, even on the clinical front, though, it's just not as accepted and implemented. And even from a broad scale perspective, the foods aren't there. The supplements are not really reaching that area yet. But I think they are, because I do communicate with quite a few people abroad. And I know they're getting bits of information and getting more curious about. Mm-hmm.
Because someone told me this week that ketosis is the most Googled diet of 2017. Which is amazing, isn't it? When you think that a few years ago, it was probably number 52 or something in the list.
It is, yeah. And off the charts.
Yeah.
Not even yeah.
And, I think when I talk to my friends about it, some of them are kind of definitely dialed into it and have heard about it and are even interested in it. And some of them will say, it's hot right now, but will it always be hot? What would you say to that?
Yeah. Well, it's been around for a long, long time, since, about 100 years, actually. And I would say it's probably going to gain more momentum as it has in the past, just simply because, it works. And people just tend to stick to things that worked. From my perspective, it's obviously not a fad diet because it is, the standard of care for seizures. That's what I study. And even, more applications are emerging. So I think what's new and kind of refreshing is that we acknowledge and recognize that the ketogenic diet, as it was developed by Mayo Clinic and implemented, early on by Johns Hopkins, does not have to be as super strict, as far as 90% fat like we thought. And now the modified Atkins or modified ketogenic diet, and then the ketone supplements, and now various food products that allow you to eat like a ketogenic cookie or brownie can allow you to be in this state that gives you, practical advantages like not getting hungry and just having more energy throughout the day. And of course, weight loss, right? That's a big one. I'm actually not that interested in that, but it is something that I acknowledge and see it quite a bit. I'd say most of the emails that I get are, testimonies from people just saying it was the only dietary strategy that worked for me for losing weight.
Yeah, well, me too. I mean, I am a spindly, chicken-legged individual, Dom, and I don't want to lose weight, but it's not the reason I'm doing it at all. But I must say, I've toned up. It gets rid of the old muffin top, doesn't it? It's great, Yeah, I've been doing it really for digestion. As well as a kind of sharpness, and this podcast is all about energy. That's why it's called Zestology. And I had a whole load of neurological symptoms for a while after contracting a virus, which also meant I was in bed for a few months, which is another reason that I was interested in ketosis. But I definitely, I have noticed that my digestion, I don't know if it acts as a reset or, my digestion's a lot better than it has been in years, and I wonder if that is because of the ketosis diet.
It's great that you bring that up because I do get quite a bit of emails from people with like celiac disease or Crohn's disease or just inflammatory bowel disorders, and it seems to work remarkably well for that. Not for everybody, but for most people. And that could be due to a number of different things. The volume of food that you're eating is a little bit less, so that may help. But I also think, it is an elimination diet. So when you're eating the ketogenic diet, you're eating mostly like protein, fat, and veggies too. And a lot of the things that may be irritant to your gut are grain-based or wheat-based. And they're eliminated just by virtue of, the macronutrient composition of the diet. Eliminates a lot of the things that cause GI issues for people. Now, adding lots of MCT and coconut oil can also kind of stimulate GI motility. So you have, you may have the runs for a little bit with all the fat coming through, depending on your fat source. So a lot of people kind of feel better in that regard, depending on how whatever they're coming from. I always have like a kind of sort of a fast digestive tract. So a lot of people, it has corrected their GI issues. So that's something that is looking into. I think it's even studied now. There might be a clinical trial out on that, on various inflammatory bowel disorders. Yeah, and also with the virus that you mentioned too. I'm actually working on an NIH grant that is, probably shouldn't talk about it, but it's
go on.
It's addressing. I don't want to give the idea away, but it's addressing the issue of viral induced neuroinflammation, which a lot of the viruses that are most pathological.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah, do tend to hit the central nervous system pretty hard, and the virus can be damaging also to the central nervous system. So we think that nutritional ketosis has some beneficial effects there. And I've picked up viruses here and there. My wife got hit with dengue fever, and it was like threatening back. This is kind of years ago, and she was hospitalized and almost like in a coma. I had the emergency kind of fly in, and she was like in an area where you wouldn't expect to get dengue fever. And it was a reminder of how vulnerable we are to these viruses and how hard they can hit your system too. So, she's recovered like fully from that, and she's not keto, but she's eating more keto, around me now. But it was kind of a sobering, eye-opening experience to see how devastating a virus can be, especially certain strains of viruses.
Yeah. And it's funny, because you go to the doctor and they say, look, we can tell from your, I can't remember the exact term, but it was something to do with my blood count, red blood cell count, or something like that. We can tell you've had a virus, but we can't tell you what it was because modern medicine hasn't figured it out yet.
Yeah, depending on what kind of virus, it goes dormant, right? So they look at like sort of the antibodies that you make, but they can even be, maybe not present if the virus is not active at the time. So it could be tricky, depending on the virus. But there's a lot of common viruses that people have that even 2/3 or 3/4 of the population have, like the herpes virus that causes shingles and chickenpox can reemerge and cause things like herpes simplex virus. It gives cold sores, of course, HIV, and a number, Epstein-Barr and human cytomegalovirus. All these things really are, when they manifest, they are a chronic inflammatory state or acute, and there's a lot of potential there for nutritional interventions, maybe even fasting, and even maybe other disorders like Lyme's disease. Lyme's disease has been I don't know the situation over there in the UK, but
it's
in the United
States,
States,
just coming in a little bit. Apparently you can get it in Richmond Park now.
Yeah. Well, where I come from in the Northeast, originally where I come from, it's quite prevalent out there. And a number of people that I've connected with, that I've done podcasts with, even guys like Tim Ferriss have, he got Lyme's disease, and it was pretty devastating. And some of the only things that worked for him was fasting and nutritional ketosis. And I have dozens of emails from people who had the same experience too. Not to say you shouldn't do antibiotics and other things, but it can enhance those things and actually work even sometimes when they don't.
And actually, do you know what? That's a really good point, because everything medical I tried when I did get this virus 3.5-4 years ago, nothing worked. The moment I tried, inverted commas, alternative health practices, and actually the thing that worked better for me than anything was tapping, emotional freedom therapy. That's when I really started to get better. And then all these other things I've kind of layered on top of it, like trying different diets and so on. But this is one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, Don, because I know from your other work that you've done and your interviews with Tim Ferriss and everything else that you're capable of going into massive depth and you're really into the research and the studies. But also I feel like the person with the casual interest in health, you're very good at selling them the benefits of alternative ways of looking at their health that might not be necessarily a traditional pharmaceutical approach. And I just wondered, for the person listening to this who's thinking, yeah, but why do I need ketosis? Would you say, do they need it?
If they are, I would say they definitely need it if they're suffering from any kind of like seizure disorder or neurological disorder. It could potentially be the only thing that helps them, which is often the case. Many cases in the literature where, for example, drugs did not work for them, and seizures can result. The etiology of seizures and epilepsy is largely unknown. It could be caused by a malformation in the brain. It could be caused by a metabolic impairment, things like that. For example, Charlie, the son of Jim Abrams, the Hollywood producer, he tried everything, and his son implemented the ketogenic diet, and it was a thing that worked for him when the drug therapy failed, and he made a movie out of it, First Do No Harm, starring Meryl Streep. Most people don't know Meryl Streep did a movie about the ketogenic diet.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so just Google Meryl Streep, First Do No Harm, and it's a great movie that she starred in about Charlie Abrams, Jim's son, and it was needed by him. It was truly needed by him.
But most people listening to this, I guess, wouldn't necessarily don't have kind of fairly serious neurological problems. But a lot of people seem to find keto helping them just for a general sense of energy and well-being, don't they?
Yeah, so that's like the main application, or what I like to say the low-hanging fruit is really type 2 diabetes. Like here in the States, it's a big problem in obesity, right? And the problem really is that people cannot stick to a diet. Well, they can lose weight, right? But keeping it off is very hard. So the real benefit of the ketogenic diet, where it really shines, and it doesn't have to be ketogenic, it just could be like low carb or a modified ketogenic, is it controls your appetite and it controls your hunger cravings better than anything that we know of. So it helps you adhere to and maintain the diet, while you lose weight and after you lose weight. So that's the main benefit. So I would say people who really want to lose weight, which a lot of people do, the diet could be a necessary means to do that.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, especially like, this morning, for example, I don't know how you start your morning, but I had a kind of bulletproof-ish coffee in the morning. I'm really not hungry until lunch. I don't really want to eat until lunch, and I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah. You know what? I have been eating more because I was involved in a project, actually, the NASA NEMO project. I was a crew member.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to ask you about this. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I kind of wanted to lose weight. And my starting weight was about 220 pounds, like 100 kilograms, if you guys do metric. And I brought it down to like 90 kilograms or whatever. So I lost about 10 kilograms just to kind of fit the requirements, or just to get my BMI down a little bit, because they look at that. And now I've been gradually trying to gain weight, which you may be trying to gain weight. So I really needed to add that morning meal in. And for me, like this morning, it varies, but I had 4 eggs and I had some pate, which is, liver. And that's a pretty dense meal. And I had the bulletproof coffee. If you want to call it that, I make it in different ways, but I had butter and MCT oil powder. I don't know if you guys have that over there.
I've seen it on sale. Is it the perfect keto one I've seen, and I really want to try?
Yeah, I haven't tried that one. I've tried their ketone product, but I use the Quest Nutrition MCT oil or coconut oil powder, and add 1 scoop of that and maybe like a quarter thing of butter. And I brew up I know people send me different coffees, but it's like a ginseng based coffee, and blend it up into like a frothy drink with a pinch of stevia and a pinch of cinnamon, and it's really good. And that really, so I haven't eaten, going on, I woke up kind of early, more 12 hours now, and that really sustains me throughout the day.
Oh, I'm not surprised, Dom. That was a massive breakfast. Yeah. It was huge. Pate, eggs, and bulletproof coffee.
Yeah, but if you look at it on a plate, like it wasn't that much, like 4 eggs, I guess it's not. I mean, I used to eat a dozen eggs in the morning. I used to really be into bulking.
Yeah.
And just a little piece of pate, like a third of the size of my fist, maybe, but it was sustained. It's not like what I used to eat, which was like 2 bananas, egg whites. I would never eat the yolks, and a big bowl of oatmeal. And that was my
pre-keto.
Pre-keto, yeah. I was always bloated and gassy, and then stuffing my face a couple hours later. I just thought you had to do that for athletic performance, for gaining muscle, to gain weight. If you do have a fast metabolism, I've always had a pretty fast metabolism, and I thought I just needed to do that. But with keto, it's really easy because the volume of food is less, and you don't get hungry, and it kind of it really energizes me throughout the day.
Now, where do you stand on? I've been doing this for about 4 months, and I must admit, the first month I found it really hard. And to be honest, I never even thought I wanted to do it, but I decided to try it for the digestion, and I must admit it's had a massive difference. But the first month, it is tough at first, isn't it? I just felt tired, and I'd say, if anything, my digestion got slightly worse as my body was adapting to it. If only you could kind of get away without having that first month, it'd be even really better. But now I'm into it. It seems quite easy, but it's hard to get into it for people, I think.
Yeah, it is. And like you point out, a lot of people's energy may take a dip in the beginning. They may I didn't get it, but a lot of people get what they call the keto flu.
Yeah.
And you got to realize, if your brain is used to running on sugar, glucose as its primary energy source from carbohydrates, and you're depriving your body of that major energy source, your body can make glucose through gluconeogenesis, but it's going to be getting less, and it's not going to get those spikes in glucose that kind of make your brain happy and kind of stimulate insulin and do some other things. When you're on a ketogenic diet, those spikes are virtually eliminated, and your brain becomes hungry for glucose, which puts you in a bad mood. And until your body starts making ketones sufficiently and upregulating the transporters to ketones to help them get into your brain at sufficient levels, and also boosting what we call ketolytic enzymes, so the proteins and enzymes inside the cell that actually enhances the bioenergetics of the cell, which actually allow the cell to use the ketones for energy. And that's a process that happens not in 24, 48 hours. It happens over weeks to months. So I didn't really get into my stride, I would say, until like 3 or 4 months into following this diet. Of course, there's a learning curve to the diet, so I probably wasn't doing it well. So once I realized that I could add a little bit of MCT oil and do it to a point where I can tolerate it, and then my ketones would get higher. And I realized what foods work for me. High dairy foods didn't work for me, and then for many people, that's the basis of the keto. It's tons of dairy fat, and I realized that I had to kind of reduce my dairy fat and replace the heavy cream with like coconut cream and some other things. So it was a number of things that I had a learning curve with that allowed me to kind of thrive on the diet instead of just kind of doing it to see what's it like to do that. I became curious because the basis of my research was on studying the effects of it, so I wanted to actually experience it myself. And it was a learning experience for sure. But I've stuck to it. So my research I've become my own research project.
Yeah. So and how long have you done it for now?
Yeah, I started experimenting with it in 2007 and 2008 and didn't really get the blood meters and actually start weighing out everything very specifically until about 2009. So it's been about 8 years solid that I've been on some form of the ketogenic diet. So now I do a couple days ketogenic and a couple days what I call low carb, which could be 100 to 150 grams a day, but really high in fiber on those low carb days. So not a whole lot of like what we call net carbs here. I'm not sure if you guys do the net carb system over there, but
it's slightly different over here. Actually, I never know what you guys mean in America when you say net carbs. I think we just have total carbs and that's it, or something.
Yeah, that actually makes a little bit better sense. A good friend of mine, Mike Dancer, who's like a bodybuilder and really into strength training, and he had epilepsy. Actually, he's in the UK, and he's been more or less the adult spokesperson for the ketogenic diet over there for its use for epilepsy. And he always had struggles with that too when he looks at the labels and when he's here in America and I'm hosting him. But anyway, I mean,
what's his name? Mike?
Right. Mike Dancer.
I'll have to look him up because, it'd be great to organize an event with him over here or have a chat with him at least. Yeah.
Yeah, he's right in your backyard. So if you just Google Mike Dancer and epilepsy, there's a number of really interesting articles that were written about his experience with the ketogenic diet.
Yeah. And so do you ever, one of the things that I've read about is, every once in a while doing a carb up. Perhaps once a week or something like that. So I've tried that a little bit, once or twice a week, having some carbs. Firstly, I think if I'm going to have a few drinks, that does help. Otherwise, I'm enough of a lightweight as it is, but on the keto diet, I can really handle about 3 sips of wine. But when I have done these carb ups, I've personally felt, I haven't felt that feeling, that really full feeling in the stomach, when you've had 4 roast potatoes. I haven't had that feeling in a long time. And actually, I almost didn't really want it. Do you carb up?
I don't carb up in the traditional sense, so what I used to do that. And when I first started the ketogenic diet, I would kind of take the weekends off or do some like cheat meals, I guess you would call it. So I have, I kind of enjoy ketogenic food. So if I go off of the ketogenic foods, I don't enjoy it anymore. Plus, I have ketogenic brownies, I have ketogenic cookies, I have ketogenic crepes and like all these snack foods that companies send me to test. And some of them are awesome, like Keto Cookie and Now Foods brand is really good. Like I've been testing their products and they're not keto, but they're very low carb, high fiber. Yeah, Now Foods, I don't even know if they're in the UK yet. I didn't even know of them. They connected with me, and they're the most impressive array of foods that I have ever seen. And I've been the last couple of weeks I've been experimenting with those foods, checking my ketones, checking my blood glucose, doing some measurements on myself. So it's always kind of fun to kind of experiment. And then I do go out to eat at least like probably twice a week, with my wife, and it's pretty easy for me to get low carb options. Sometimes keto can be a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
But I don't. What I do is on 2 days out of the week, and I try to train heavy, like in the gym 2 days out of the week if I'm not traveling too much. On those 2 days that I train, I will get an extra 500 to 1,000 calories of foods that I normally eat anyway, which could usually just more protein and veggies. So I might back off on the fat a little bit, but kind of satiate myself with some extra protein because I need it if I'm rebuilding or trying to add a little bit of weight.
I was saying that I'm in the States in a couple of days' time, and one of the things that I tend to do is when I'm over in the States, I order on Amazon everything that I can't get over here, and then I get it delivered to the hotel where I'm staying. And I was looking at these keto cookies. There's been a huge thing. They've kind of exploded from nothing to very popular, these keto cookies, I think. But it looks like they've actually got quite a lot of carbs in them, like 24 grams of carbs or something.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting you point that out. I'm trying to look around here to see if I have any at my around my desk. Look at the label, but I have them in my refrigerator at home. So we're talking net carbs, right? So are the carbs, do they have a glucose or glycemic response?
Does it sugar? Do they sugar?
Yeah, so there's two kind of things that those cookies are made of. So a lot of them are made with like a nut-based flour, and nuts are pretty heavy in fiber. So most of the carbohydrates will be a type of carbohydrate that doesn't get absorbed in the gut. Actually, a lot of the soluble fiber makes its way to the GI tract where their gut microbiome can kind of digest it. And erythritol is a sugar-based alcohol sweetener that causes less GI problems than other kinds of sweeteners, and it's also beneficial for your gut microbiome. So it may be beneficial for, if you have some GI issues. So those two things are kind of make up the carbohydrates.
Right.
And then they also incorporate a lot of coconut oil and even MCT oil, which can, in a way, kind of artificially elevate your ketone levels because they're what we call ketogenic fats, which means when you eat them, the fat rapidly is transported to your liver and they get broken down so fast, they get burnt so fast, they tend to make ketones. So when you burn fat at a high rate in the liver, that fat can proportionally produce more ketone bodies in your blood and elevate your. So there's like little tricks that you can do and putting these foods together with non-glycemic carbohydrates and the addition of ketogenic types of fats, actually, which make the food kind of palatable too. So it makes it kind of smooth and can increase the palatability of the food. So that's what a lot of food engineers are doing now.
Yeah. So total carbohydrate, I'm just looking at the keto cookies, 21 grams, but total sugars, 1 gram.
Yeah.
So that's actually the relevant number.
Yeah, and the label tells one story, but what I find, I test a lot of these foods, and about 20% pass the test. Our test, and those foods make it to my website, ketonutrition.org. I've compiled, some of the foods on there that we've actually tested with blood measurements. One of my students too, Andrew Kutnick, is a PhD student of mine. He has type 1 diabetes, and actually he thrives on low carb diets. And if there's a food product that comes to us, he has an insulin pump and a Dexcom meter that continuously measures his glucose levels. So I will basically, go to Andrew, hey, I got something for you to test, and he can consume it. And sometimes he consumes like, double doses, like 2 of them, if it's like a Quest bar or something like that, or keto cookie. And then we can track his glucose levels, fairly continuously. It takes a measurement every 5 minutes or so. And then we can look at the glucose to sugar response to that food. And we can also measure ketone levels too with a ketone meter. And, we tend to do this. We vet out, I guess you would say, the foods that are really low carb or really keto. And these are the companies. I'll follow up with the company and be like, we love your product. It kind of passed the test. I want to, promote the product to the community too. So it has helped a lot of people who follow the ketogenic diet, for weight loss or for medical reasons, and also kids too. You put a kid on a ketogenic diet for seizures, and he feels ostracized if he's going to a party and he can't have cookies and cake. These things, it's actually possible to make some of these foods. The Charlie Foundation, you go to their website and they have really nice recipes where you can, source out the ingredients and buy these things.
Yeah.
And recipes that are fairly easy to do at home.
And for people listening, when I was talking about my experience of my first month and and you were saying, it took a few months until you kind of got really into it. There is something that I only realized a couple of months in that is quite a helpful shortcut. And that is this thing known as exogenous ketones, which is essentially a tub of what looks like a kind of protein powder or something, but essentially creates ketones in the body instantly, isn't it? Now, Don, this is one of the best working supplements I've ever taken, and I think I've said this before on the podcast. The only thing I can compare it to is illegal drugs. The energy rush that it's absolutely astonishing that something can be legal and make you feel this good. I've not had this with virtually anything else I've ever tried. But why do they work so well?
Well, you have to understand, and people look to me as the exogenous ketone guy, because that's kind of the cornerstone of the research that I do.
Yes.
Actually, research that was brought to my attention by Dr. Richard Veach at the NIH and Dr. Karen Clark over at Oxford, who's doing some great work on ketone esters. So, I've been studying this for about 10 years now, and from the very beginning, and I started reading about ketones as an energy source, like an alternative energy source for the brain. Your brain basically runs off glucose 100% on a normal diet. And if you stop eating and enter a state of fasting, you go into fasting ketosis that actually for many people, it puts them into a heightened state of awareness. Their thinking is more lucid, and that energy from the brain is actually for the brain is coming from these ketone bodies. So this idea, and that's these ketone bodies are generated with a ketogenic diet, and the ketones help to stabilize brain energy, brain neurotransmitters to prevent seizures. So they make the brain run more efficiently to prevent seizures from happening. So it became obvious to me, at least in reading the science behind it, well, why can't we, this is basically a source of energy like glucose or creatine monohydrate, which athletes take, for energy. It enhances ATP production. So I embarked on this whole, project and wrote grants, and it became the cornerstone of my research to further develop the science and the application of exogenous ketones. And like you said, when you consume them orally, the blood levels are elevated and they become a source of energy that your brain, in many states, preferably uses ketones, especially if there's impaired glucose metabolism, which can occur from a wide variety of things, even stress. So, and they're made now to taste fairly good. Companies, the technologies are being developed to make them palatable, tolerable, bioidentical. So they actually become like a food source, right? So you have carbohydrates, you have fats, and you have proteins. That's what we call our macronutrients. Now, ketone bodies are water-soluble small molecules of fat. So they're somewhere in between. I actually like to talk about them as like the fourth macronutrient, because they contain calories, just like oil would, fat would, and protein would. But the difference between fats and ketones is that when you consume ketones, they are small enough and they can readily cross the blood-brain barrier to enhance, brain energy. And, whether you're sitting at your desk and you're a high-power CEO that has to work 12, 15 hours a day, or you're an athlete that really needs to supercharge your central nervous system and your muscles for energy, there's numerous applications there, or therapeutic applications, obviously, which is kind of what I study mostly.
Yeah.
But we also do performance applications, even undersea. Living in an undersea environment is an extreme environment, and living in space is an extreme environment. And that's really the cornerstone of what we do too, is studying the application of these ketones in response to physiological and neurological changes that occur underwater and also in the space environment, or simulation of the space environment.
And in terms of, I always like to be as natural as possible. And I actually think the ketosis diet it's a very natural, it's a very primal diet. It obviously doesn't feel that primal, scooping a scoop of kind of bright white powder into a glass of water every morning. And I guess there's not a tremendous amount of long-term research on exogenous ketones. Are there any dangers to them?
So there's been various forms of ketones like sodium beta hydroxybutyrate, and now the ketone salts are multiple minerals combined with beta hydroxybutyrate. So these have been around for decades and actually given intravenously at really high concentrations. I have maybe about 10 articles where they have been given. One is a Lancet article, fairly showing that you can do this. You can administer ketones via IV, which is parenterally, or through orally, and that they have they can promote metabolic health in people who have, say, impaired energy pathways and things like that. So only recently did they get to the point where they're commercially made and synthesized on a large scale, where you have a fairly large percentage of people consuming these things. In United States here, some of the bigger companies have sold like something, I was looking at the statistics, something like 5 million or up to 10 million doses of them have been consumed, and there hasn't been any adverse events reported. So we have things like Red Bull, there's lots of reports of people getting sick or hospitalized or drink too much. Whereas exogenous ketones now, are the ketone salt products, are being consumed in massive quantities. And so far there haven't been any reported adverse effects, at least that are showing up on the FDA website. And we do a lot of research. We do very high dose studies, even long-term studies, and then we do all the clinical chemistry. And we haven't seen any evidence of like liver or kidney impairment. Actually, we see that these organs tend to work better if you administer, and that may have to do with a reduction in certain inflammatory markers, and chronic inflammation and high blood glucose are things that can destroy your kidney function over time, and even your liver over time, and even your brain, actually. So these are the things that these biomarkers are things that improve over time with continuous and daily sustainment of ketones with these exogenous ketones.
You must be very proud though, Dom, because you've been looking into this stuff for 10 years, and you get an upstart like me who heard about it 4 months ago saying, these exogenous ketones are great, and you've been looking into this stuff and researching this stuff for 10 years, and it really has hit the mainstream over the last year or two, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. And I can't give myself credit for this. It was really...
I'm giving you credit for it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. A lot of the early pioneers on this, and I always like to name them because they really motivated me to go down this path, is Dr. George Cahill of Harvard Medical School. And he did some studies with fasting, definitively showed that ketones can replace glucose, largely replace glucose as the primary source of energy for the brain. And Dr. Richard Veach at the NIH, a former student actually of Hans Krebs, the Krebs cycle, I'm sure you're familiar with, brilliant biochemist, and really spearheaded a lot of the early ketone research. And Dr. Henri Brunengraber of Case Western really started, this was a couple decades ago, this idea, but no one really latched onto it. And I think it's because in the medical literature, ketones were designated as metabolic poison because they showed up under conditions of what was called, ketoacidosis, which is a condition that results from an insulin that is attributed to like type 1 diabetes. Or alcoholic ketoacidosis is something that happens. It's a very rare, and it's distinctly different than nutritional ketosis or even administering exogenous ketones. It's very different. But in the medical literature, and I teach at the medical school here, even the students will have lots of questions about this, and I'm actually doing a workshop with all the MDs and many clinicians here to kind of give an overview of this, and because more and more medical doctors are approaching me and saying, I read this book and I implemented it in my patients, and it's the only thing that have cured their non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is very prevalent here, or their obesity, or was the only thing that worked to bring their weight down. So that's kind of why, and maybe I picked up on it, and recognizing the utility and application. I also like to talk about it too, on podcasts. I got the word out through various media channels, I think, that were otherwise most academics kind of hide in their lab, and they publish in high impact papers. That's what we have to do in academia, but it doesn't necessarily get the attention of the mass media. So when you promote it and you have people out there who actually try it, and then stories get picked up, you could publish 50 Nature papers and it doesn't get picked up, but you have a few celebrities that try it and say, it helped with my inflammation and I lost weight. Then it gets put on everybody's radar, and then people fact check. And when you fact check the ketogenic diet and go to PubMed, then you have validation of it. You see all these studies, that are coming out that really validate the neuroprotective, anti-seizure effects, and also the emerging applications of nutritional ketosis and the beneficial effects. So that I came in when I started studying this in 2009. Pediatric epilepsy was the only thing that was used for, and now we have a dozen or more applications that physicians are using it for.
And in terms of exogenous ketones, if you're not actually in ketosis, I mean, let's say one of my mates eats a pretty standard high carb diet, loves a pie and the odd, quite a few pints of beer. If he, let's say he had a bad back or something like that, could he still take exogenous ketones to help with inflammation, even if he's not on a ketotic diet?
So my answer to that is yes, but it may work better, obviously, with a low carb diet, or maybe even a ketogenic diet too on top of that. So we actually study exogenous ketones in the context of a standard high carb diet. And we do that with, like, in our rat and mouse studies, we give them, the 60, 70% diet that's carbohydrates, percent carbohydrates, and then we mix in exogenous ketones into that diet, or we do like a tube feeding. We will feed them every day, like in the morning, and we'll look at the effects. And the very first study that we did was a seizure study where animals were on a standard diet and high carbohydrate diet, and administering, oral administration of a ketone ester prior to a high concentration of oxygen, which would simulate like a very deep dive by a Navy SEAL, that a community that uses a particular breathing apparatus with high oxygen. We found that just 30 minutes, it takes like a couple days, maybe even a week or more to get into therapeutic ketosis sometimes. In 30 minutes, you can achieve that with exogenous ketones. So that's really one of the benefits. So we have demonstrated the neuroprotective or brain-enhancing effects of exogenous ketones in the context of a standard high-carb diet. And my colleagues at Yale University incorporated a ketone ester into a standard diet and looked at various inflammatory markers, one being the NLRP3 inflammasome. It's like it's a complex, it's a molecule within cells within the body that when it's activated, it produces a lot of inflammation in the body. So the ketones have in part an effect at suppressing the activation of the NLRP3 inflammasome. So you are suppressing a driver of systemic inflammation, and the type of inflammation that's associated with autoimmune disorders or age-related chronic inflammation that a lot of people get.
Wow,
and
that's amazing, isn't it?
And that's just ketone supplements. Yeah. So the obvious experiment would be, or maybe to get optimal results, is to do some form of a modified ketogenic diet with ketone supplements.
Yeah.
And we've done a little bit of that and even published that, but that's on the frontier of doing multiple things in addition to ketone supplements. But yeah, the effects are pretty remarkable. Which
you have to be careful though when you first have them, don't you? You don't want to take too much at once.
Yeah, well,
you might have a bit of a social issue on your hands.
Exactly. So that's the case, with medium chain triglycerides. It's one of the side effects is that it can, go right through you. It can pass. You can give you diarrhea and loose stools. So you have to titrate the dosage over time, and then you can actually, tolerate more the more you take it. The better it works, and the easier you can tolerate it over time. And even the ketone salts that are on the market, especially the ketone salts for some of the products out there, can, because of the mineral load, the high amount of minerals, which can be beneficial in some ways, but it creates an osmotic shift in the gut where it pulls water into the gut. And you can have some loose stools. So you really have to, when you get these things, my recommendation is to, when you get a product, to do a half dose and try it at a half dose with lots of water, and even maybe a little bit of food to help you tolerate it. And then there's a couple products out there that irritate my stomach more than others, so I just stick to a few products that I've kind of vetted out and that work good for me.
Yeah. Actually, do you know what? The one that I've been using, I've never had a full scoop because it's so strong and it works so well. I've had max half a scoop and often about a third of a scoop. This stuff is great.
Which brand is that?
That's Perfect Keto is the one that I've been using, which you can get over here now on Amazon. Yeah.
Yep. I have that product too. Yeah, that works good. Over here, I'm not sure if I don't think it's sold over here, but there's a couple. Ketogenics and Prove It makes a product, and also the newer one, which is probably similar to Keto Perfect, or Perfect Keto would be Keto Logic over here, and that comes and it really tastes like a fruit punch. There's apple, there's all sorts of brands or sorts of flavors. So it's amazing. So you're probably aware of the ketone esters, and they taste pretty.
I've heard about this. Tastes like petrol or something, does it?
They do. Yeah, they do. I think eventually, food technologies and food masking strategies will make them palatable. But you have two issues there. A ketone ester is very expensive to produce, at least currently. Things could be scaled up, and they're quite popular. In the UK, the cycling, this Team Sky, I believe.
Do they really?
Well,
I'm not surprised. I would use it. I mean, anything that gives you an edge. I've been having this stuff before I go to the gym, and it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few elite level athletes that get their hands on these compounds and use them in ways to enhance athletic performance. I don't think they're going to be banned because your body makes ketones. It's almost like creatine, right? I mean, athletes, football players, even strength athletes take creatine monohydrate. Yeah. And it's it's made in a lab, and your body makes it too, and you're just consuming it to boost your levels to supra-physiological levels, And I guess people do that with things like testosterone, and but testosterone is kind of synthetic, and
that's not so good with testosterone.
Yeah, definitely not good. But with ketones, I can't really see any. If there's a performance advantage and there's not an overt health negative consequence. So it doesn't seem like it should be on the ban list. But I think it's one of those things that people are looking at because as more things come on board, and of course that attracts a lot of attention. If someone knows that they could take a substance and get that, even a 2%, 1 or 2% increase in your power output for like a cyclist or something is going to be the difference between, a bronze and a silver and a gold medal.
Yeah.
So that tends to drive a lot of interest in these things like ketone esters. And in our hands, you feed them to mice and they run faster, they run longer on things like treadmill.
I'm not surprised.
In addition, I mean, we published recently that their anxiety behavior goes down. So like their their fear response, their exploratory behavior. So they're kind of more social. So there's all these benefits, and even things like wound healing, like stuff we wouldn't even expect, and show that you can enhance the wound healing process.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a mood elevator as well. But listen, Dom, I do need to ask you about one thing, and that is we need to talk about keto smell. Okay. Now, when I first started in keto, I'd been told about keto smell, that sometimes people smell a certain way when they go on keto. And I felt like I'd smelt it on friends of mine. It's not kind of like a bad breath smell. It's kind of almost like a sweet kind of skin smell. Is this a thing? Because my experience with my girlfriend suggests it is. And for the first couple of months, she could smell keto on me, but now it's gone and it's fine.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned your girlfriend too, because around the same period of time that I started dating my girlfriend, who's now my wife, I kept asking her, when I got into this thing, and she thought I was crazy. Like she didn't, and she's assistant professor and a cognitive neuroscientist, so she knows about this stuff, but she just thought that I was crazy. I was doing it myself and taking these weird compounds by myself. I kept asking her, like, do I smell? Do I smell? I was kind of paranoid about it. And of course, you always think, I always think people think their own smell is natural. Like when you go into a house, and sometimes people have dogs and it's like, whoa, there's like a big dog smell here, but they probably don't realize it or something. I have asked people and told them to give me their honest opinion, including my wife, who's pretty straight. I mean, she's from Europe. She's very straight up and tells me like it is. And I only under certain conditions, if I get dehydrated or sometimes if I'm out in the sun, I notice it. I start smelling a little bit funky. And it's that sweet smell. I wouldn't describe it as like a aversive smell, but I noticed during the course of the day, especially when I'm doing intermittent fasting, and I will kind of do what you did, I guess you would call it modified intermittent fasting, where you take in some calories like bulletproof coffee in the morning and essentially don't eat until like 6 p.m. and then snack on things till about 10 p.m. I noticed that in the latter half of the day, towards the end of my fast, that I'll have I can taste it in my mouth. Not only can I smell it, I start to taste it in my mouth a little bit, and that's we make 3 ketone bodies: beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the salts that you have, the perfect keto product and the ketologic product, and we have acetoacetate. Now, beta hydroxybutyrate needs to be converted to acetoacetate to be used for energy, and the acetoacetate is a ketone body that can break down to something called acetone, and acetone has neuroprotective, has some interesting effects. And one of the effects is that it's volatile, and that if it's in your blood and in your saliva, it will evaporate out, and then you smell it. It has a particular smell, a fruity smell, and that's in type 1 diet. In type 1 diabetics, that's how they used to actually diagnose it, because they used to have this like really fruity smell. They used to be in diabetic ketoacidosis, but that's only for people who don't produce insulin. So that is can be higher in some people than other people. So some people experience it, and if they do, I just tell them, stay hydrated. If you drink enough water, and if it's really bad, or you can just chew gum or something like that.
I also reckon it might be stronger when you start out, because there might be a toxins element to it as well. For me, it was stronger over the first month or two, and now it seems to have abated a bit. But I don't know if it was... I mean, because in terms of measuring, I know you're a fan of blood measuring. When you kind of measure on a daily basis, what's a kind of a good number for you?
Yeah, for me, I think I'm a good ketone utilizer, which means my tissues are pretty hungry for ketones, and then I transport them and burn them pretty well. So my ketones now rarely get above 2 or 3 millimolar. They usually stay at about 1. When I wake up, it's something like 0.5, which puts me into a very mild state of ketosis. And through the mid part or the latter part of the day, I'm about 1 to 2 millimolar on the blood meter, which is considered mild to moderate ketosis. And on some days, if I'm just getting extra protein, so some days I do pretty strict keto, and other days I just do like low carb. I can be like really low on ketones or not until I consume an exogenous ketone product, and I do that, prior to
straight out. Yeah,
and it can shoot straight up. But it varies. But typically about 1, is about where I feel best. And I tell people say, well, ask me what is the optimal ketone level to be in, and it's really it's kind of personalized and dependent. But I will tend to identify various points in time where I feel really good, I'm energized, and I'll measure my ketones at that given point in time. And I consistently get to 1 or 1.2. That level seems to be where my brain and physiology is optimized, where my mental acuity and my total energy level is kind of optimized. So I kind of shoot for that.
That's so helpful. Because I've been hitting those levels between 1 and 2, and I was thinking, it's a bit low. But hearing you say that, I think, great, perfect. I'm happy with that. So
yeah. And if I'm sitting at my desk now or standing at my desk now, and then I have to go walk around and do some physical activity, I can drop that pretty fast. And that blood level is sort of dropping fast because my tissues are using that energy source as fuel. Similar to a type 2 diabetic who has blood glucose, if he exercises, that glucose levels go down in the blood. So the same thing happens for ketones, right? Because it's an energy source. So they tend to get an accurate measure of your ketone levels, be sure to measure like at the same time every day, and also make sure you're relatively sedentary for at least 30 to 60 minutes to make sure everything's kind of stable, like your metabolism's kind of stable. And then, you draw some blood, and that gives you a snapshot of what your true ketone levels are.
Dom, something I've asked everyone on this podcast is, what is one book you'd recommend and one tip for living with more energy? What would your book recommendation be? It can be as highbrow or as lowbrow as you like.
Yeah, wow. I have so many books, and it depends. You know what? As I speak right now, I'm opening up my my Audible, and actually the last book I read or listened to was it was called, the subtle. I listened to 2 at the same time. One was called The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
Oh yeah.
Which was really good. I enjoyed it. And then the other one, my wife and I are listening to it, is that, and I was blown away to see that you had him on as a guest, John Gray, Beyond Mars and Venus. So it's kind of the follow-up book to Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And I have the audiobook of that, which really delves into a little bit more of the science behind, and the biochemistry, if you will, of men and women, and why they're different from a kind of a fundamental point of view. So you asked for one, but I gave you 2.
No, that's great.
Because I'm listening to it at the same time. So
he's great, John Gray, as well. We got to have dinner with him when he was in London, and he was just such good company. He's lived a very interesting life.
Yeah. I kind of delved into, always, look into what are people's backgrounds? Like, why should I be listening to him? And I realized that he has a tremendous amount of experience, and there's really no substitute for experience. And that guy has heard it all. So I really enjoy listening to it. It's very a good use for your listeners out there. If you haven't, so many people have listened to his book. If you haven't listened to it and you're a couple out there, it can help you out tremendously.
Yeah. So that's brilliant. And then what would one tip be? Would it be ketosis for living with more energy?
That's too much of an easy one. It's not. Ketosis is not for everybody. It is for me. Actually, my wife does not follow. She does low carb sometimes and likes trying the ketogenic foods. But I think, one tip that I've learned that I need to stick to really is to carve out time for I guess what I call creative downtime. And really that time I like to allocate towards, relationships. So healthy relationships and, living a life, with purpose is important through your work. I mean, that's one thing, but it would have to come second to healthy relationships. So I think, and that's family and friends, and for me, first and foremost, my wife, and if I don't do it, if I don't, put it into my calendar each day to allocate time each day, it's so easy to get caught up in work, especially when you're super passionate about things. And that could be, walking the dog and talking, or just, reading, listening to John Gray's book together or something like that, doing something on a daily basis. It's kind of like going to the gym, right? To build and improve in that area of your life, you need to carve out time and some kind of plan for it. So I call it creative relationship time or creative downtime.
That's
so
awesome.
Every day you got to carve out for that. And meditation too, but that's something I'm just getting into now, different breathing exercises. One of the things I'm studying is Buteyko breathing and Wim Hof. Actually, he'd be a great guest to have.
I've had him. I've interviewed Wim Hof. Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah, he's a character as well, isn't he, Wim Hof?
yeah, he totally is. Yeah. So hopefully, I'm going to make arrangements to study him and actually.
That would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be, and to learn to extract what I can out of his methods and apply it to my research, and to really study it from a fundamental level is something that I'm very interested in doing. And even our funding agencies, are know of him and actually are willing to maybe even support some of this research, which is kind of unusual. But I'm really excited about that. Yeah. So wow, you've had some really awesome guests on there. So I'll have to look up the Wim Hof.
Yeah, definitely. I just looked up. It was number 72. But when you're in London, you must let me know, and we'll get John Gray here, Wim Hof here, and you guys can have like a massive kind of panel geek out, and we'll basically solve the problems of the world within an hour, I reckon.
That would be an eclectic kind of combination there. So I'm all up for it. So I do make a couple of trips to Europe. I think I'll be coming out there maybe in March.
Oh, great.
March, so I'll give you a heads up on that. Yep.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, and obviously, we kind of met because you met my mutual friend, our mutual friend Tim, at the hyperbaric oxygen conference, didn't you? And I mean, that's really interesting stuff. They're getting some amazing results with the hyperbaric oxygen.
Absolutely. And that's a whole nother topic I could talk about. And even for things like I talked about, like Lyme's disease, it really has helped quite a few people. So an emerging area, a lot of potential there. We're at the cusp of understanding the healing properties of oxygen and how best to apply it to different scenarios. Yeah. So it was great meeting Tim, and glad to meet him and connect with you that way.
Yeah. Well, Dom, thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate it. And I've got a long list of things to put into action now we've been chatting.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Tony. I appreciate it, and really enjoy your podcast, and will be a very devout listener from now on. I've just been listening a couple weeks, and it was great to finally connect with you, and sorry about all the schedule mix up, but we had the big hurricane, so that kind of.
Oh yeah. And listen, I'm a devout listener to you as well. I've pretty much anoraked out on all your podcasts so far, and I'm really thrilled you've come on Zestology. So thank you.
And thank you. I appreciate you telling me that.
That is it for this week's Zestology. Thank you for listening. There's plenty other of Ketosis podcasts that I've recorded, not least with the founder of Perfect Keto, Dr. Anthony Gustin. And this podcast is brought to you by Perfect Keto this week because it is now available in the UK. As I said in the podcast, it's something that I have been using. It's one of the exogenous ketones that we were talking about. It's astonishing, the effect. I mean, it is absolutely incredible. Have a little go on that before you go to the gym or in the morning, and it's I would liken it to almost stronger, and even in terms of enhancing mood, than a cup of coffee. So yeah, really works well, and see how you go with Perfect Keto, which is now available on Amazon in the UK, as well as obviously in the States and everywhere else too. Thanks for listening. Hope you found it helpful. I'd love your feedback on ketosis and how you found it, because as I say, it's not easy. Actually, if you want any kind of personal support, then send us a message and I'll let you know my experience. And as always, the best thing you could do to help the podcast, help me, is subscribe and write a review as well. Maybe write a review about this podcast on ketosis, because the more feedback that I get, I read it all, and it's just helpful, good and bad. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.